Have you ever wondered why one night when you see the moon, it looked different last time you saw it the other night? What is up everyone, Sir Z here. In this video, we will learn how the moon changes how it looks, and these changes of appearance are called phases of the moon. So what exactly are the different phases of the moon, and how are these changes possible when we only have one physical moon floating around our planet Earth? The phases of the moon are the appearance of the moon from how we see it at night, from where we are standing on Earth, and how it reflects the light from the sun, depending on the moon's position and angle in relation to the position of the sun and from its audience like me and you on the planet Earth. This involves the size and the location of the area of the moon's surface that is reflecting the light coming from the sun. Here we have a photograph of the moon. What do you think is the face of the moon shown in this picture? Let's go ahead and learn about the different phases of the moon, and then we're gonna go back to this photo after the discussion. The phase of the moon we see depends on how the moon is positioned relative to the position of the Earth where we are and the angle it receives light coming from the sun. In this position, since the moon is in between the Earth and the sun, the moon is blocking the sunlight from our position. That means the backside of the moon, which is facing away from us, is the side reflecting the light coming from the sun. Therefore, what we see from our position is the shaded side of the moon. This phase is called the new moon. The new moon is the beginning phase of the moon. At most of the time, we don't see the moon at all, especially when the night sky is so dark. Now from here, we will begin learning about the waxing phases of the moon. Waxing means the moon begins to reflect the light coming from the sun. As the moon revolves around the Earth, and at the same time the Earth with the moon continues to revolve around the sun, more areas of the moon gets exposed to the sun, and so more areas of the moon gets brightened up by this light source. So when the bright areas on the moon grows, this is called waxing. That means the bright area is growing. From the new moon phase or position, it will move to its next position, which therefore will change the angle of the sunlight reflected on the surface of the moon. Since the light source is coming from the left, our moon will be lighted in this angle. As we look at it from our position, we will begin to see that the right side edge of the moon is slowly getting brighter because at this time, the sun's position is at our right side. Our right side. Coming from the new moon phase, the moon will change to look something like this with the right edge starting to brighten up as it reflects the light from the sun from that direction. This phase is called the waxing crescent. The first word refers to the movement of light on the surface of the moon. The second word refers to the shape, form, or size of the area reflecting the light source. Waxing means the bright area is growing or getting larger, while the word crescent means the shape of the bright area looks like the letter C. From the waxing crescent phase, the moon continues to move towards our left. So as we look at it while standing from Earth, the moon from its waxing crescent phase will appear to our eyes like this. More areas got brighter, that half of the moon's surface facing us is lighted up. From our position, we see that the right half of the moon, our right side to be exact, is bright, while the left half, which is the side facing away from the sun, is still shaded. If you see the moon with the right half bright or lighted up by the sun, this is called the first quarter. The size or shape of the moon during this phase is a quarter or 1/4 of the moon. Why quarter, you might ask, and why is it called first quarter? Imagine the moon as an apple. We divide the apple into quarters or 4 equal parts. The side of the apple that we see is the side facing us, just like the side of the moon that we see at night. If we can light only 1/4 of the apple, it will appear something like this to our eyes. The same principle applies to how we see the moon during its first quarter phase. Only 1/4 of the moon is visible to us because of the moon's position and angle towards the sun. The bright half of the moon during the first quarter is the right half because that is where waxing starts during the moon phase cycle. From the first quarter phase, the moon then moves to its next position around the Earth. This is the waxing gibbous phase. Waxing because the bright area of the moon is still continuously growing, and gibbous, we will use the term gibbous once the bright area of the moon is more than half of the moon's surface facing us. As we look at the moon, since the moon will be receiving light from the sun from this angle, we will see that most of the moon's surface is almost totally bright, with just a crescent-shaped area remaining at its leftmost edges. Again, if the bright area is growing, it's called waxing. If the bright area is more than half of the moon's surface that we see, it is called gibbous. So this phase is called waxing gibbous. From waxing gibbous, in this phase, the side of the moon facing us is the same side of the moon facing the sun. Since in this phase, the entire surface of the moon facing us is totally bright, this phase is called the full moon. The full moon phase is the direct opposite of the new moon phase. Later in the video, I will share to you some easy ways or tips on how to remember all these different phases of the moon, so stay tuned and keep your notes ready. Once the moon reaches its full moon stage, the next phases to expect are those that involves with the moon slowly losing the reflection of the light source as it continues to move and revolve around the earth. That means these remaining phases are the stages that the moon will slowly go dark. Those phases are called waning phases. If the waxing phases involves the bright area of the moon slowly growing, waning on the other hand is the other way around. Waning means the bright area of the moon facing us, this time is slowly shrinking or getting smaller. The moon will move to the next stop, and by this time, the moon will change its appearance to something looking like this. The reflected light continues to move leftward, while the shadow will slowly start scrolling in, beginning from the moon's rightmost edges. This is the waning gibbous phase. Waning because the bright area is starting to grow smaller. Gibbous means the bright area is still more than half of the moon's surface facing us. As we look at the moon, since the light source is coming from this direction, it lights up the ball of rock on this side, but not able to reach this side, resulting to us seeing this small shadow creeping in from the right edge of the moon. Next stage or phase is the third quarter phase. The third quarter phase is the opposite of the first quarter, with half of the moon facing us is bright, while the other half is covered with shadows. The left half of the moon as we see it is reflecting the light from the sun. Moving to the number 8 phase location is the waning crescent. Again, waning because the bright surface area is shrinking or continues to get smaller and smaller, and crescent because the remaining bright area looks like a crescent or a letter C. After waning crescent, from here looking at the illustration, with only just the left edges of the moon is lighted by the sun, and the shadow continues to cover the moon's surface moving to the left, can you guess what's the next moon phase once the shadow finally covered the entire moon's surface that we see? We're back to the new moon phase, and from here, the moon will go through the same phase cycle all over again. Now let's recap all the 8 different phases of the moon as it revolves around the planet Earth and spins around its own axis. Remember that the phase of the moon always starts and ends with the new moon, with the moon almost not visible from the night sky. Waxing crescent with the light slowly showing up follows, beginning from the right edge of the moon. First quarter phase, the first time we will see the moon in half within the moon phase cycle. Waxing gibbous, where the light is almost over the entire surface of the moon. Next is the direct opposite of new moon, which is the full moon. During the full moon phase, the entire surface of the moon is very bright and round. Followed by the waning gibbous, this starts the phase where the bright side of the moon will begin to get smaller and smaller. Opposite of the first quarter is the third quarter. This is when the left half of the moon is visibly bright, while the right half is left under the shadows. And finally, the waning crescent. Again, waning because the bright area is getting smaller, and crescent because the remaining bright area of the moon looks like a letter C. And to restart the cycle, the moon is back to its new moon phase. Now here are some easy ways to help you remember all these 8 different phases of the moon. Just remember these important notes. Number 1, the phase of the moon is directly related to the size of the bright areas, or surface of the moon. It has nothing to do with the size or shape of the shadow or shaded area. So focus on identifying the shape of the bright areas of the moon, never mind the shaded areas. And there are only 4 to remember. If the bright area looks like a letter C, it's called crescent. If the bright area is half or around half the surface of the moon facing us, it is called quarter. If the bright area is more than half of the moon's surface, it is called gibbous. And finally, if the moon appears like a perfect circle, these are the moons. Dark circle is the new moon. The beautifully bright circle is the full moon. Number 2, it also describes the motion or movement of the bright areas on the surface of the moon. Remember, the bright areas on the surface of the moon are the areas exposed to the light source, the side of the moon facing the sun. So basically, the shapes of the moon's bright surface change due to the moon's constant changing of position as it rotates and revolves. Waxing means the bright areas on the moon is growing or getting larger. It comes off from the new moon phase, then as the right side edges begin to brighten, you will notice that the movement of the light on the surface of the moon begins from the right hand side, our side to be specific, moving towards the left direction. When you see that the bright areas on the surface of the moon begins to shrink or gets smaller, moving towards the left direction, this is the waning phase. Waning means the bright areas on the moon is shrinking or getting smaller. Here's another quick way to remember these phases if in case you are looking at an illustration similar to this. From left and right ends are the phases using the word moon. Both new moon and full moon are completely round. The new moon is a dark to totally invisible circle, while the full moon is the phase when the moon is super bright and super round. Both crescents or letter C's are at the left side, the waxing crescent, later the waning crescent. From top to bottom are the phases both using the word quarter. These phases are during the cycle when the moon appears to be divided in half. First quarter has the bright half side to the right, the third quarter has the bright half to the left. While the gibbous shapes are both at the right side, waxing gibbous and waning gibbous. And remember, we call gibbous if the bright area or surface of the moon is more than half of the surface we are seeing. Here they are again with their respective labels or names. If you want a screenshot or screen capture, feel free to do so. Just remember the phases start from the new moon at the left side, moving down to waxing crescent, and continue to the right as it goes back around to the left, ending again with the new moon phase. Those are the 8 different phases of the moon. I hope you enjoyed the time learning about them so that the next time you see the moon up in the beautiful night sky, you will be able to identify what phase the moon is currently in, and you will no longer wonder how did the moon change its appearance. Going back to my question at the beginning of this video, can you now identify what phase of the moon is shown in this photo? That's a wrap. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and thank you for spending time to learn with me. Sir Z here, never stop discovering, learning, and creating. I will see you again soon in the next video or in the coming future projects. God bless everyone.